Okay, so this week, one of the most interesting things that I noticed was that was just the use of like words like vampire and like biblical connections to poetry, like in the Common Woman poems. Where the copper-headed waitress was referred to as a snake, with also the word wickedness and all those other references that made her out to be evil. Like, I've been studying like stuff like Foster's How to Read Lit books since I was like a junior in high school, and I hadn't really had the chance to ever like see those elements. It was mostly like geography or weather elements that I saw in the literature that I was reading back then. I also had the opportunity last week to go to Stratford, Ontario for one of their plays. They were showing the play Love Labour's Lost by William Shakespeare, and before I went to see that play last weekend, I kind of just was ready to write off most of Shakespeare's works because he seemed fairly pretentious. In my mind, when you write or create something or tell stories, the goal is to make them as understandable as possible. And I couldn't really, before I started analyzing like the different stressed and unstressed parts of words in poetry, I didn't really understand why he got so much accolades. I understand that his stories are pretty fun to study, but I didn't really understand that there was another layer of work that went into stressing and unstressing certain words. I just thought he was doing it to be, or they were doing it just to be weird. But now that I've been studying it, I think it not has more value because it's still kind of just, I feel like it's still just another kind of way of writing, but I know now that I know that more work goes into it, I can respect it more. And I also realize that I do like Shakespeare's plays. I would just rather watch rather than read them, because when you read them, when I read them at least, I feel like I just get lost. It's easier to fall into the jargon and get lost and miss out on big parts of the story. But when you watch them, because they're dramas and that's kind of like how the story was intended to be told, even if you do get lost, you can still kind of feel included in like the jokes and the tragedies, just because you're watching people's faces and their actions, rather than just sitting and trying to make sense of words on a page that you may or may not understand. I also kind of noticed that when I would get lost, I would stare at the costumes and then stare at the set until somebody laughed at a joke, and then I could get back into it, which I thought was pretty interesting. I'm surprised I'd never heard of that particular play before, but I guess people do mostly explore Shakespeare's tragedies more than his comedies. It was a good play. It had pretty costumes, and the casting was pretty diverse, which I was excited about. I think it was in the Avon Studio, in Stratford, and the last play I saw there was a year ago. It was called Crazy for You, and that also had a very diverse cast, even though both of the time periods were times where people would probably just assume that mostly only white people did theater or only white people were in the stories. Despite the kind of whitewashing that typically happens in media, the castings of both those plays / musicals, I don't know, had lots of just actors of color in it, which made me really happy. Because I study diversity. That's where I plan to put my intertitle. Yeah, that was week 3. Have a good weekend.